So I invite everyone to take out their Chumash again and turn to page 884. And I wanted to read this story with you because the name of the Torah portion is Chukat, which comes from Chok, which is a statute or ordinance that we don't necessarily understand the meaning behind it. There's just certain mitzvot we're given, like the red heifer, the parah adamah, the red heifer that is supposed to be burned to ashes, and the ashes are used to purify someone who becomes impure through contact with a corpse. Very unusual. Well, now we're going to read one of the most unusual circumstances in the entire Torah when Moses, out of all people, is punished for striking the rock, or is that what he did? Why is he given such a severe punishment, not getting to enter the land? What did he do so badly? If you look on page 884, verse 2, it says right here, the community was without water, and they joined against Moses and Aaron. The people quarreled with Moses. And by the way, you can't blame the people. They're thirsty. They want their water. They want something to drink. If only we had perished when our brothers perished at the instance of the Lord. Why have you brought the Lord's congregation into this wilderness for us and our beasts to die here? Why did you make us leave Egypt and bring us to this wretched place, a place where no grain or figs or vines or pomegranates, there's not even water to drink? So the people are complaining again, but you almost can't blame them for complaining, right? Imagine going a couple of days, imagine going an afternoon in Houston without water. Right now, imagine living in the desert and there's not a lot of water to drink and you've got your family. It's easy to forget how bad Egypt was when you're in the middle of the desert, thirsty, wanting water. So Moses and Aaron go to God. They want to know what to do. And this is what God says to them. Verse 8, you and your brother Aaron take the rod and assemble the community, and before their very eyes order the rock to yield its water. Thus you shall produce water for them from the rock and provide drink for the congregation and their beasts. So what does God tell them to do? He says to them, order the rock, right? Command the rock to bring forth water. All right. Makes sense. Seems fair. They'll tell the rock to bring water. It'll bring water for the people. And then they'll have water to drink. But let's read what happens. Verse 9, page 885. What happens? Moses takes the rod before the Lord as he had commanded him, and they assemble the congregation in front of the rock. And he says to them, listen, you rebels, shall we get water for you out of this rock? And Moses raises his hand and strikes the rock twice with his rod, and out comes copious water, and the community and their beasts drank. So it works. But the Lord said to Moses and Aaron, because you do not trust me enough to affirm my sanctity in the sight of the Israelite people, therefore you shall not lead this congregation into the land that I have given them. Those are the waters of Meribah, meaning that the Israelites quarreled with the Lord, through which he affirmed his sanctity. So let me ask you, what did Moses do wrong that he was given such a severe punishment that out of all that generation, he's not allowed to enter the land of Israel? What did Moses do wrong? Okay, so you would say okay, so he hit the rock. You would say that. Keep that in your mind. What do you think it was? Okay, so God tells him, speak to the rock, not hit the rock, and he hits the rock. Any other thoughts of what Moses did wrong that would deserve such a severe punishment? Sarah? Okay, so good, another good point. He doesn't say, listen, my dear people, or listen, my faithful, or listen, my beloved people. He says, you rebels. And this is the leader. Perhaps that's the sin. We have two possible sins. Noga, what do you think? Right? Shall we bring you water, right? Is he comparing himself to God here? Right? He doesn't say, shall God bring you water? It's, shall we? Is he talking about him and Aaron? Is he talking about the leaders of the people? Who's he referring to there? All possible sins. Now let me share with you what some of the commentators. Oh, sorry, Mark, what do you think? In other words, he wasn't with the people enough. He had almost removed himself. He was too aloof from the people. Wasn't the type of leader they needed to conquer the land. They needed someone, a different type of leader, possibly as well. Even though it doesn't really talk about it here, but maybe by his actions he's demonstrating that. Good point. Right. Right. He doesn't say, shall God get you water, right? Right. Well, here's the interesting part about it. Abarbanel, for example, lists 10 different sins, one commentator. Another commentator says, my entire life I have refrained from examining this topic closely because I was afraid of coming up with a new interpretation. In this way, I might find the chief of all prophets guilty of another sin. One commentator says, I've spent my whole life and I couldn't find an explanation that I liked. We're not alone, right? We came up with 4 or 5 explanations here. We don't know for sure. The Torah doesn't specifically tell us what Moses did wrong. We can only assume that he did something wrong. But it's very problematic to identify the sin. It never says explicitly what the sin is. It seems that whatever Moses did, so did Aaron, because Aaron was punished too. Right? Aaron dies in this Torah portion. God seems almost unjust or unfair. Whatever the sin was, it doesn't seem to fit the punishment. We're talking about Moses. He doesn't get to see the land of Israel. He doesn't get to be in the land of Israel. He'll see it from afar, from Mount Nebo, but he doesn't get to go to the land of Israel. You would expect the name of the place to come from the sin, but it's named after the rebellion. So let me take a couple of the answers you gave and then give you, I think, what's the best interpretation that I have found. Someone mentioned that he hit the rock instead of speaking to it. And someone said, Sarah, I think you said, Moses gets too angry by calling them rebels. Now, the commentators over the centuries that came up with those 2 answers as well, but believe it or not, they reject those possible answers. Right? Hitting the rock, well, in Exodus 17, he also hits the rock. Right? So remember, this happened earlier on, and he hit the rock then, and he wasn't punished for it. Aaron didn't hit the rock. Moses did, but Aaron's punished. And even if he hit the rock, God's name is still sanctified because it's still a miracle if water comes out of the rock. So the commentators, they come up with that possible sin, but they seem to reject it. Now, what about the possible idea that he gets too angry with them? But if that's the case, the commentators say, look at the whole book of Devarim, the whole book of Deuteronomy. It's one big sin. Remember, the last book of the Torah that we'll read, he almost calls them rebels. He criticizes them throughout the entire book. And so maybe the people deserved a little chastisement. Maybe they deserve to be called rebels because, let's face it, yes, they're thirsty, they're hungry, but shouldn't they have remembered all the good things God did for them? And for them to say, bring me back to Egypt, how could they say that? Maybe they deserve to be called rebels. So let me offer what I think is the best answer to this question that I think we can relate to. Noga mentioned when Moses says, shall we get water for you out of this rock? That's what Nachmanides goes with, the Ramban. He says his sin is, he should have said, shall God get water for you out of this rock? It gives the impression that Aaron and Moses are responsible for doing the miracle. That's the big sin. Moses, throughout the Torah, has to make it clear to the people that he is not God, that he is not godly. He's a human. It's God that deserves the credit. It's God who performs the miracles. And by even saying the words, "Shall we perform this miracle for you?" Moses has forgotten his proper place. The modern commentator Rabbi Jacob Milgram adds that pagan religious leaders typically spoke when performing miracles. The Torah silences prophets when performing miracles, so God will be given the credit for the miracle and not the prophets themselves. Moses has forgotten something very important. God should get credit for the miracle. Therefore, he's no longer capable of leading the people on their most extraordinary challenge, conquering the land of Israel. Mark, you hinted towards this as well. Moses has forgotten his place. He almost feels like he's a god. Maybe he doesn't think that always, but he's made a mistake at a very crucial time. And then, as a leader, he's given a very severe punishment. Sometimes leaders are held to higher standards, and Moses seems to deserve this punishment according to the Ramban. Let me offer a story you may have heard of before, but I wanted to relate something from this lesson to our own lives. The top of Roger's head was bobbing up and down in the raging river, and as the waves lifted him up into view, his arms could be seen thrashing helplessly as he attempted to pull himself towards the distant shore. Roger had been standing near the fast-moving water when the soft dirt bank crumbled suddenly beneath his feet. He was a strong swimmer, but his strength was no match for the powerful, swift current. When he tried to shout for help, he choked on the water that filled his mouth. Roger struggled for air. The river was racing towards the waterfall and the rock-strewn rapids below. It looked as though nothing could save him. Roger never believed in God or in the power of prayer, but he had nowhere else to turn. In desperation, he sincerely whispered, "God, please bless me. Help me to reach the shore. I don't want to die." Roger had hardly finished his prayer when something struck him on his back. A huge log had floated downstream and was pushing against his body. He reached for its branches, grasped them firmly. Then with a great effort, Roger pulled himself onto the log. Just as he did, one end of the log struck the bank of the stream, causing it to turn towards the land. This allowed Roger to quickly and gratefully scramble onto the solid earth of the river bank. With a sigh of relief, Roger said, "Never mind, God, I got out myself. I don't need your help after all." How often do we do that? We forget to give credit to God. And even Moses can forget that. And let us learn from this story that we may never know for sure what the sin was. That's the great mystery and beauty of Torah. It gives us and our ancestors over the centuries the opportunity to discuss. Maybe that's the reason why God doesn't specifically say in the Torah what Moses' sin was. It allows us to learn many, many important values from this story, and one of which, perhaps, is that we need to give credit to God for the good and blessings in our lives. Shabbat Shalom, everybody.